Hey everyone, good evening. Hey everyone, good evening. Hey Ujjwal, how are you? Is my audio and video okay? Is my audio and video okay? Good evening, Harsh. Awesome, awesome. Chalo, let's talk about Postman today. We are going to create the backend for Postman and understand how Postman works, right? So in Postman, you see that there is a drop down which allows you to select whether you want to make a get call or a post call or a delete call or any type of calls, right? Then there is this URL. This is the rest. This is the URL. Okay. Then there is this send button, and there are these options. Let me remove them. Then there are these options with which you can make different type of API calls with different type of settings, right? The most important ones are headers and body. Okay. Basically, what happens is whenever you put down your headers, whenever you put down your bodies, you select some type, right? And you give Postman what do you want to send to backend, specifically in a post call. What it does is it compiles everything, creates different variables, and put it in a library called fetch or exis. Okay, both of them. Suppose if we talk about fetch, both of them accepts first parameter as the URL in a string. Okay, then some options. For example, what is the method? If you want to say if you want to send post, then it sends post. What are the headers? Right? The headers object, etc., etc., etc. So on the front end, it is what it is doing is it is giving you a good UI and it is compiling all of them into an object and passing it to fetch or exis, right? So all of these comes to becomes the options for fetch or exis with the URL that is provided over here. If there is just a get call, then this is the only thing that you require. By default, fetch makes a get API call or exis make a get API call. Okay, so this is very straightforward. All these are done on the front end side. We'll talk about it in a little bit. Then this is the main thing, the most important thing or the most important feature because of which your Postman is famous, which is called collections. So what happens is whenever you make an API call, right, it creates a copy of this API call and send it to Postman backend to save it. Okay, it saves all the API calls that you make and makes a collection out of it. Okay, what are collections? Basically, a group of API calls that you make. Understood? Now, these collections, for example, the auth API that I did or day 9 that I did, all these API calls that I made, I saved it and I can share it with you so that these are pre-filled. Okay. So your body is pre-filled, your headers are pre-filled, your URLs are pre-filled, your type of REST APIs are pre-filled. All of these are pre-filled using the saved uh, API call, the API call that I made in day 9, okay, or for tiny URL or for Calendly clone, etc. Okay, it makes it very, very simple for you to get all the API calls, just like we learned about Swagger, remember? Where all the details were there, you can make an API call with pre-filled data, right? Uh, all those things can be done using Postman itself. You can share this collection with somebody if they are running your project, and they will get all the API calls with all the URLs present, all the expected body present, all the expected headers present, everything. Okay, this much is understood. This much is understood. What Postman does and why, what are collections, etc. Awesome, awesome. Now, if suppose you want to create Postman, okay, you alone want to create Postman. You are the developer for the front end as well as on the back end. How would you architect it? Architecture means what are you going to keep on the front end side? What are you going to keep on the back end side? Remember, divide and conquer. Just like we have been doing in every project, divide and conquer. Okay. What is required in backend? We only save the data or we send the data which we are going to require in future. Okay. What are the things that we are going to require in future? The collections, right? Making of the actual API call with fetch or exist should be done on the front end. Okay. You can do the same thing in backend as well. But what will happen is your desktop application or your website or your front end will send the data to your backend, right? The backend will again make an API call to the respective server whose URL you have put. This server will return some data to backend, and this backend will in turn return the data to your desktop application or website. Okay, so this is a long process and is not necessary. So we remove the backend from here. Desktop makes the API call directly to the server. Server sends back the response directly to desktop. Okay. But whenever you make an API call, we send a request to backend as well to save the data. Understood? Now, uh, suppose you have a URL. Okay, let's say it is localhost 1338 slash API slash v1 slash schedule. Okay. Now you have the type of the API call. Let's say this is a post call. Okay. You would have some headers as well. Content type as application slash JSON. Right. Authorization as bearer token, etc. Right. Now, basically, what you have to do is you have to make a variable out of them, whatever you are inputting from the UI and pass them to your fetch or XIS. Okay, URL and then options. In options, you say method is the method or the type, right? Headers are these, okay? Headers are headers, etc. This fetch is converted your uh, by your system into a curl command. Okay, in curl you write the URL first, then what are the options like headers and so, right? I whether you use XIS or whether you use fetch, all these are converted to curl command. Curl is a low level API call which uh, which is present in your terminal as well. Okay, so if I go to my terminal and s- see, I make this curl command. Can you guys see? Right. The syntax is something like this: curl hyphen location, then request, then get. Okay, I'm making a get request to this URL hyphen header, content type as application JSON, and the data or request.body is this. Is it visible to you guys as well? Okay. Simply if I enter, curl is present in all of your systems. Whether you are on Windows, whether you are on Linux, whether you are on Mac or any type of system. In turn, all the applications use curl to make the API call. Okay. And it returns the data uh, which this API call returns. Okay. Understood what curl is? When the API calls were first created, or uh, then only curl came into existence. Okay, this is the oldest way of making the API call. All the packages that makes an API call uses this curl command to make the API call. Okay, um, let us learn a little bit more about these packages. Right. So if you write fetch API and search for the MDN result, you will see previously it was XML HTTP request. Now it is fetch. It is present in all of the modern browsers, right? You do not have to install any packages. But if you are on Node.js, then you have to install the fetch package. Otherwise, if you are doing on the front end, all the modern browsers support uh, the fetch. Okay. Let us see an example. See, simply you write fetch and the URL. Okay, it returns a promise inside which, if you want to get the JSON, if it has application slash JSON, so you have to use .json and then you get the data, right? You all are aware of promises. Now, if you want to use post, then if it is a promise, then you can use async and await. Simply write fetch the URL, the method. If it is CORS enabled, then mode CORS. Uh, Cache is no cache. If you want to cache, you can do that by default, right? Uh, if you have headers, you can use these, and there add body. So JSON.stringify body. The rest of the things you won't be needing anytime soon. right? And in the last, return your response.json. Okay, just have a look at this MDN doc to learn more about Fetch. Let's talk about Exaias now. Exaias is an NPM package which does the same thing which Fetch does, but a little bit differently, right? Where you have some classes already created, you can cancel this also. Any API call, okay? Again, if you want to make simply a get call, just use Exaias in brackets, your exaias.get, your URL, right? It also returns a promise. So you can use dot then and dot catch, and you can also use dot finally in Exaias. Okay. It also accepts the same thing, method, post, delete, put, whatever. So either you can use directly Exaias or exaias.get, exaias.post, exaias.put, okay? Or you can use something like this. Method post, URL this, data is this. It it has by default many headers set up, so it is much easier to use as compared to fetch. Fetch is the most basic API call making. If you want to have already pre-built API calls, right? So this is also very straightforward. Any doubts in this? Any doubts in this? XIS, fetch, curl. Let's talk about curl as well. So curl is already there in all of your laptops. Let's look at some curl examples. Right. First of all, you need to write hyphen hyphen request to let curl know what exactly the request you want to make. Then you write in the request, then hyphen hyphen URL, whatever the URL is. This is for next line. Okay, line break. Otherwise, you can write the whole thing in a single line. If you want to write it in a different line, then you use this. Right? What are the headers? If there are multiple headers, then you write multiple headers like this, like authorization with the bearer token, content type application JSON, and the data in request.body, whatever you want to send. Right. Uh, is there a different example? Right. For post, simply you simply write curl hyphen hyphen request get, okay, and the URL. That's it. Or if there are headers, then headers. Okay. So we took care of curl as well. Now let's get to our backend. Let me just close this. These are the packages that we are going to use. First of all, we are going to need an authorization to let users save all the requests that they are making. Right? Uh, so we are going to use bcrypt, we are going to use cors, we are going to use .env, express, JSON web token, Remove this. We are not going to use this. In place, we are going to use SQLite 3. Let me just install this. npm install minus save SQLite 3. Yeah. So we are going to use SQLite 3. Remove this. Right. Now, let me show you one more way of having the project setup. Many people, what they do is, especially when they are front-end devs, they like to create an SRC folder in which all the model views controller reside. There is just one file outside this for running the server. They just use the port over here, and every other code resides inside source. Okay, so there would be an app.js file. The model views controllers would be inside this. Models controller. Okay, uh, config, and let's just say utils. Okay, this is also a folder structure that many people follow. Right, so let's get started coding. First of all, we need our app. We are going to create everything in source app.js. Okay, and here we are just going to listen to port. Let's just say the port is 1338. http dot create server your app dot listen to the port, and whenever this is done, simply write console dot log server is running. Okay, now let's create our app.js. Okay, this should be in index.js. Let's create our app.js. Inside this, we need Express. Also, I'm using ES6 in this. Many of the new Node.js versions use ES6 now. So either you can use require for older Node.js versions, but if you are on 16 or above, I guess, then you can use ES6, the latest JavaScript version over here. Okay. So I'm just showing you a different way of writing things, nothing else. There is no right or wrong. Express, and we are going to send the app back to index.js. Right. Now in this, we are going to create our middlewares. App.use Morgan dev. Okay. App.use express.json. App.use express.url encoded for the body thing. Extended true. Right. Um, let's also set up course. Import course from course and set up course over here. App.use course. Okay. Okay. I imported it twice. Right. Now, first, let us create some models. We are going to use SQLite for this. Right. We have been using Mongo for very number of projects, so I wanted to switch back to SQLite for this. Okay. There would be basically three different models for this. One is for the request itself. One is for all the headers that you are getting, right? And one is for the user. So there would be basically three headers, user, and the request itself. Okay, let's create header first. Import data types from Sequelize and model from Sequelize. Okay, we are going to use DB, so let's create db.js in which we simply require Sequelize from Sequelize. Queelize. Sequelize is equal to new Sequelize. I hope you guys remember the Sequelize syntax. DB name, user, and password. Some options. Dialect. We are going to use SQLite. If you decide to use .env, will the file also reside in source folder? No. .env comes outside. Yes. To use ES6, I forgot we need type equal to module in your package.json. Thank you, Paljar. Right. Coming back. Your host would be inside config/db dot SQLite. Okay. Now export constant, connect to database. In case of error, console dot error the error and exit the process. Right. Now, await for sequelize.authenticate and console log connected to DB. Right. Now let's import this over here. Sequelize from config DB class header extends model. Right. Let's leave this as such. Uh, you have a init method in which you can also write all the basically the model structure, right? This header would have some ID. Its type would be data types dot integer. Auto increment, let's set this to true so that we do not have to take care of it. And this would be a primary key for getting some data of that row. Okay. Then we would have a key over here, which would be of type string. Data types dot string. This should not be null. Default value is empty string. Okay. Then we would have the value of the header, right? Because your headers are a key value pair. So we want to store the key of that header and the value of that header. Type of this would be string as well. The value should not be false and the default value should be an empty string. Okay. Always remember to have as many conditions in your database level itself so that anybody cannot modify your database with the APIs or send a different type of data which is not accepted. Okay, there would be a checked field as well. The default value of this would be false. Okay, when you're using the init method, you have to pass the sequelize over here and export default header. Okay, so your header would be have a key, would have a value, would have a checked field. Now let's talk about request. Import data types and model from sequelize. Import sequelize from config db. Class request extends model. Again, with this project, I'm just trying to show you different type of ways of doing the same thing. There is no right or wrong over here. Okay. Type data types dot integer. Auto increment would be true. This would be the primary key for us. There would be a URL for the request, right? There would be a URL of the request. There would be type and there would be body. Three things only we are considering. There would be a type, data types dot string, URL type and body. Allow null to be false. We need a URL, right? And the default value is an empty string. Over here, this should be in curly brace. Right. URL type, also a string, also allow null false, also default value, and body. Okay. Also a string, also allow null false. Uh, Over here, this could be true, does not matter. By default value is your empty string. Okay, let's just remove these and export default your request. Right, now let's create our user.js. Data types model, sequelize, class user extends model. Right, user.init, what all fields would be there for user? Again, there would be an ID with type data types dot integer, auto increment to be true, primary key is true as well. There would be a username with type of data types dot string, allow null to be false. This should be unique to true. Okay, and there would be a password. Again, I'm not going too detail into your authentication. We have done it several times. So I would be nearly just touching uh, the authentication part over here. Export default your user. Okay, I hope there are no doubts still here. Yes, Abhishek. Yes, the package size extension is because of an extension. There are many extensions that have downloaded. See, it depends on you whether you want to keep your .env inside a folder or outside. Mostly developers, including me, like to include it outside because it is easier to do git ignore. Export more than one variable. Okay. Simply use uh, export, say constant a equal to 1. I have already told this previously. So simply use export before any variable or whatever you want to export, right? whenever you want to import this, you will import it as an object now from the path. Understood, Haruna? So if there is a default export, you don't require this object iteration. Over here, you would require user, right? Or if you want to use both of the approach, then you use something like this. This is the default one. This is the uh, individual exports, right? This default name can be different. If you are using user over here, then it could be anything. But the individual export names cannot be different. Cool. Right. Let's take care of our middlewares first before going ahead. Okay. One more thing. If you want, suppose you want to have many to many or belongs to whatever you want to do with uh, the foreign keys. You could create an index.js and uh, write all your belongings over here. Okay. So suppose, again, this is just a way of doing things. I import all these over here. Okay. Now I say user dot has many request. Request dot belongs to user. Okay. Uh, request dot has many header, and header dot belongs to your request. Either you could have done this in their specific files, or you create an index.js and you import all these always from your index only. Okay, you have to import this index so that these connections that you are writing takes place. Now await promise dot all. It accepts an array of promises. User dot sync alter true. That is when all these connections that you have written is done, then I want to return a promise. Request dot sync, again alter to be true. That is, it can be modified. Header dot sync alter true. Okay, and at the last, export all these as an object. Export your user, your request, your header. Okay, understood this part? This part you guys understood? This is another way of exporting multiple things at once. I have written all the connections. That is, user has many requests. Request belongs to users. Request has many headers. Headers belongs to request. And I waited for all of them to get synced. Right? Now, whenever You want to basically use these either user request or header. You have to import it from this file rather than their specific files. Understood? Right. Let's create the middlewares. Let's rename it. Again, middlewares would be the same middlewares that we have been using in all our other authentications. So I would go very fast with them. Let me know if you guys don't understood anything. JWT from JSON Web Token. JWT. Uh, let's define JWT secret. You could have used it inside an environment. I am simply defining it over here. Okay. Now, if I want to export one specific thing, I use export constant token extractor. You will have request, response, and next in the middleware. Right? Uh, let's create a constant auth request.get your authorization header. If your auth exists and it starts with your bearer token, right? If auth dot to lowercase dot starts with bearer, then we want request dot token is equal to auth dot substring from line number 7. Okay, so your uh, header would have bearer space the token, right? So from line number 7, if I make a substring, then I get the token, correct? So I use this auth dot substring, that is uh, create a substring from line number from character 7 till the end of the string. Understood? Right, let's create a function for handling all the errors. It will first have an error, then request response, and then next. Okay. Uh, for this, let's create a switch statement. Again, different way of doing the same thing. We will have a name inside this. We can create different cases for it. For example, if the name is validation error, then what do we want to do? We want to return response.status 400.json error as error dot message. Okay. Um, if the case is JSON web token error, then we want to return status 401 with invalid token message. Okay. Similarly, if the case is for token expired, for example, token expired error, then I would send 401 with token expired, right? Or the case is sequelize unique constraint error, right? So basically, what I'm doing is I'm creating a map with the response.status and the messages that I'm going to show, right? This can also go into constraints where you create an object. For example, you have this in the key, you write this, okay? Then in the message, you write your message, invalid token or whatever, right? And over here, simply you could have returned your errors of whatever the error dot name you are getting. Okay, response dot status 40400. The error is this. In a single line, you would have done the exact same thing, right? But over here, then your status would always be 400. If you want different 400, 401 or whatever, you could have also created an object out of it with message and status 400, 401, right? And over here, you would have written dot message and over here dot status. Okay, so this is another way where people usually write all the errors. Yes, we should always have a default name export. I'm just showing you different ways of writing the same thing. Either you can create a switch statement or you can create an object with something like this. Okay. By default, you return response.status 500.json, the error, uh, something went wrong. We don't know what went wrong, but something went wrong. Okay. Anyways, understood this? And at the last, you call next with the error. Okay. I think I messed up something. Awesome. Thank you, Aruna. Right. If it does not go over here, then it would call the next. Tick. Let's create next method token validator. Let me just copy it from somewhere. All this we have already learned. Give it a second. Hmm. So we have token validator, which basically validates whether your token is present or not. It gets the token from request.token, which we have set over here, right? If the token is not present, then it would send 401, token is missing. Otherwise, it would decode the token with jwt.verify, the token and the secret, right? If it does not have ID, then it would send invalid token, login again, and it would call next. If there is an unknown endpoint, then I have this middleware 404 unknown endpoint and validate token with jwd.verify. If the token is not present or the ID inside the decoded token is not present, I would say the token is invalid or missing. Right. I could have used, I could have created different middlewares for this as well. But again, this was not a very big code, so I have it in one file. Now let's create our controllers. Let's create the request controller first. Right. Uh, Basically, you are just saving it in the database and doing all the normal get, post, put, delete, CRUD operations. Okay. So you need router first from Express. Right. Then we would require some middlewares for token extractor from dot slash middleware index or just middleware. So basically, if you write a name of a folder, then basically it treats it as folder name slash index. Okay. See over here, it is by default taking index. Okay. That is why we have, mostly have your index file so that even if there are multiple files, just like in models, then also you only require the folder name and you get everything. So token extractor we are going to need, token validator we are going to need, and validate token we are going to need. Similarly, if I want to get from uh, your models, then I'm going to write dot slash models. That's it. Okay. Uh, User I'm going to need, request I'm going to need, and header I'm going to need. This you guys understood? Why I have not used slash the file name exactly? How is it this working? Haruna, you understood this? So basically, if you write the name of the folders, it automatically goes to the index file. It imports the index file out of it. Okay. So that is why most of the developers you would see that they create an index file, right? It also helps when, for example, I have to change the request totally, right? So I won't touch this file if this is a very big file. I would create a new file and just change the import of this request and the export of this request. All the places in which those imports happened will not be required to change. It will be very minimal change if we use this type of thing, if we use this type of slash index files. Okay. If you want to get all uh, of the requests that are created, then we have this slash URL. It would first check for token extractor and token validator. If the token is all valid and everything, then you have this callback in which you will get request and response. Try catch. I hope you guys are following what is happening, right? Inside this, first let's decode the token first. So decoded token is equal to validate token, the request, the response, and next. In this also we are going to get next. Right? If your response dot headers sent. If there are headers sent in the response, then do nothing. Otherwise, request is equal to await request dot find all the request where your user ID is the decoded token dot ID. Okay. Let's remove all the headers from this request dot map. It will return an array of all the requests made by the users. We will map over that. Okay. And use request dot to JSON to convert it into JSON. Then again map over it. We will get the request. Your request dot headers, we empty the headers from each request. Okay. Actually, we are not emptying the headers. We are setting the default value of headers as an empty array. Okay, so that we can populate it from your headers table, because we are saving headers and requests differently, right? For each request in your request, inside your header model or header table, find all where your request ID is request.id, right? From the headers table, find all the headers and put it inside the request. Request.headers is equal to headers.map. First convert it into JSON. We will get headers and return headers dot to JSON. Okay, this will put all the found headers inside request, and when all of this is done, we would send the uh, response back. Response dot status 200 dot JSON the request, right? And over here return response dot status 500 dot JSON, the error is E. Right. Any doubt in this? If you want to get all the requests that you have created, we have this slash URL, which will first check if the token is valid or not. It will extract the token and things like those. Right. So if you want to get all the requests that a user has made, right? So we have created this slash URL in which it will first check the tokens, whether the user is valid or not, right? Then it will decode the token. We have the decoded token. We have created a function to decode the token. We will first check if the headers are sent in this. If the headers are sent, we won't do anything, right? Because we are not expecting any headers in it. Now, uh, we have saved all the requests in request table and all the headers in headers table, in header table, right? So we will first find out all the requests that have been saved with the user ID. Whatever the user is logged in, whoever is logged in, Uh, whatever request he has created, get it from the request table, right? Now, uh, each request will have their own headers as well. So loop over all the requests that this user has created, convert it into JSON, and put dot headers as this empty array, right? So by default, your dot headers would have an empty array. This array would be filled when we find all the headers with this request ID. Okay, so we will loop over each of these requests which the user has created, and we will find the ID, and we will find that ID inside header table, right? This will return an array. So we will put request.headers, which we have put as empty array previously. We will put or populate this with whatever results we are getting from this line and convert it into JSON. When all of this is done, we will send back the request. Now understood, Haruna? Is this understood now? Awesome. If you want to get any specific request from the database, simply you send the ID, okay, and find it in the database. Request response and next. Right. Now again try catch. Inside this, you will simply require that request ID, which you are sending in the para, right? Uh, request dot params dot ID. Okay, this ID. You get it from params. Now simply have to find it in the request table. So let found request is equal to wait request dot find by pk, basically find by id, your request id. Okay, again populate all the headers from it. If this is not found, then you have to return response dot status 404 dot json not found, right? Find their corresponding headers inside headers table. Saved headers is equal to await header dot find all, where your request ID is your request ID. Okay, find all the headers, convert it into JSON, since we are dealing with only one request right now, so simply we are going to put inside the headers whatever we have found, saved headers, right, to JSON and return this response dot status 200 dot JSON your found request. Okay, this is when we only want to find only one specific request. Okay, we have that request ID. We find it in the request table, find their corresponding headers inside header table. Okay, inside request dot headers, we put the found headers and return it back to the client. Okay, understood? Okay, now if you want to create two JSON is specifically for uh, SQLize or SQLite, and JSON.stringify is JavaScript thing. Right. If you want to create uh, any specific request, okay, then first check whether the token is valid or not. Then you will have request response and next. Have try catch. Now, simply you need to save it in the request table as well as on the headers table. Constant decoded token is equal to validate token, your request, your response, your next. If let's find out the user is equal to user dot find by ID or PK, the decoded token dot ID. If your user is not found, then response dot status 404 dot JSON the error invalid user. Okay, then get the request ID from uh, params. Okay, request ID is equal to request dot params dot ID. If your request ID is 0, that means this is the first request ever created. New request is equal to await request dot create your URL as empty string, your type as empty string. Okay, this is just a dummy request that gets created if the request ID is 0. Your body as empty string. The user ID is the decoded token dot ID, and save this out. Saved request is equal to wait for new request that we have created dot save and return response dot status 201 dot JSON saved request. Okay, if the request ID is already present, then what we will do? We will first find out the request ID. Found request is equal to await request dot find by pk the request ID. If your request is not found, then return 404. Request not found. Otherwise, get URL, get type, get body, get headers from your request.body. Okay. If suppose they are not sending any of them, you can set a default value over here itself. By default, this would be an empty string. By default, this would be an empty string. By default, this would be an empty string. And by default, this would be an empty array. Okay. This is also done on the database level also, right? But over here also I'm doing, right? Then simply you have to update the found request. Found request dot URL should be whatever the user is sending. Similarly, type and body. Okay, update it in the JavaScript object and save it. Saved request is equal to await found request dot save. Okay, now update the headers. Request we have saved. Now we have to save the headers. For constant header in of headers, await header dot update Find it by key. Okay. Uh, Update your key with your header dot key, whatever is coming from the user. Similarly, update the value from header dot value, whatever is coming from the user, and update checked as header dot checked or by default false. Right? To find out where to update, you write where your ID is your found header dot ID. Okay? Convert it into JSON. Find all the saved headers now. Request ID is your saved request dot ID. Put it inside the saved request. Again, that what we have done before. Inside your headers, you get the saved headers and return this back to client. Response dot status 200 dot JSON your saved request. Okay, let me revise this one more time. To create any specific request, you get some ID. Okay, you in the headers, in the authorization header, you check whether the user logged in has the access or has the valid token or not. You decode the token, find the user. Okay, if the user is not found, you send 404 user not found. Otherwise, you get the request ID. If the request ID is 0, that is, you want to create a dummy request ID. This is a special case, which a feature that we are giving. If the request ID is 0, then basically we create a default request in the database with URL as empty string, type as empty string, body as empty string, and user ID as the decoded token dot ID. Right? Save this in the database, send it back. Now, if suppose it is already there in the database, if any ID above 0, that means it is there in the database. Okay, so we find that if we are not able to find it, we send 404. We get URL type body headers from request.body. This is how you set the default values of them. Okay. In the found request, whatever we found from the database, we update all these and save them. Right? In saved request. Now, in this saved request, we have to put all the headers that the request that the user is sending. Now we find all the headers. We update all the headers for that specific header ID that the user is sending, right? We update the key, we update the value, we update the checked. We convert saved request to JSON. We find all the headers that we have just saved. Okay. from this specific request ID, put it inside the saved headers and send it back to the client. Is this understood? Is this understood? Similarly, very small, another example. If you want to delete it, so request router dot delete. Okay, this is how you make the delete API call. You will get an ID. Okay, if you want to delete any specific header, you will get header and the header ID. This is the request ID. This is the header ID. If you want to delete any specific header. Again, token extractor, token validator, and a callback. Request response next. Okay. First, we need to decode the token. The request, the response, and the next. Right. Then we need to find that user dot find by pk, the decoded token dot id. If your user is not found, you send 404, right? Otherwise, you have header id from request dot params dot header id. Okay, you find the saved headers using header dot find by pk, your header id. Okay, and destroy this row because you want to delete this row, right? So saved headers dot destroy and return response dot status 204 dot end. Okay, simply it says that everything is done. Okay, so to delete any row, you use the dot destroy method. Okay, awesome. Authentication we have already done so many times, so you guys would be able to do the authentication. That would be your THA for today. Create a different controller for user.js. Do the sign up, sign in over here. Okay. Inside your app.js, let's import all these things. Import error handler, unknown endpoint from middleware, import your request router from controllers/request, right? And create the endpoints. App.use slash API slash request and call in the request router over here. If none of the routes are found, then we use unknown endpoint. Okay. And in the last, if see, with your next, it will be passed to your last handler or the last middleware. So it will come over here, the error handler, right? So similarly, just like request, you are going to create the sign up, sign in, like we have done so many times for user. Okay, jwt.invalidate. Simply delete that the whole thing. Then your JWT token will get invalidated. Wherever you are saving that JWT token, just simply delete that. Right. So uh, this was all for today's class. Simply for Postman, we have get, post, put, delete, the CRUD operations, where inside the request, we are going to send the headers. Okay. If you want to get any specific, or suppose all the routes, all the connections that you have created, you make a slash call to API slash request. Okay, if you want to get any specific request that you have created, you make a call to slash ID. If you want to create, you make a post call to slash ID. If you want to delete, you make a delete call to slash this URL. Okay. Again, whenever your header should be inside your request, so you have to find all the headers, all the requests in the database, and you have to put all the headers to their specific request inside a headers key before sending back to your client. Understood? This was all for today's class. I will meet you in the Mahasabha VC. Peace.